The recruitment industry in the UK is responsible for £40 billion worth of revenue a year. It's a big industry.
The feeling is there's skill shortages. The feeling is there's no candidates. The feeling is that there's going to be a huge shortfall in the next 5-10 years.
And that goes back to the problem that we've got an ageing workforce. We've got guys there that are going to retire, and when they retire, we don't just lose their skills, but we lose their experience.
I think there was some stats came out there. It was a LinkedIn questionnaire to architects. Percentage-wise, how much time do you spend on site? Some were saying 20-25%. A lot of them had nothing. Well, hello there, everyone. Welcome back to the Hard Hat Talks podcast. My name's Kenneth Martin, your host, and I'm joined today by Graeme McCormick from Confero Recruitment. Yeah? How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. We've known each other for a good few years now.
We have indeed.
And over the last maybe year or so, I've seen your transition to Confero. Maybe you want to give us a wee bit of an introduction to yourself and how you started the business?
Yeah, so, it goes back to university, I suppose, when I studied business studies. I think back then I always had this wee inkling that my personality and character would be suited to doing something a little bit more entrepreneurial, but obviously you have to cut your teeth and get into industry and find out where you're going to be positioned. So, as you know, when we first met, I worked at Hayes, spent 10 years there. A great learning curve. I couldn't have asked for him better from a company. I'm sure we'll talk about stuff like this later on. We talk about training and development. That firm are pioneers of that in our industry. But I probably knew from maybe, I'd say 4 or 5 years in, that this was an industry that I really enjoyed, i.e. recruitment, and particularly within the sector that we work in within architecture. And I knew that I'd probably do it for a long term. So at that point I started thinking, right, what would I do here? How do I position myself to start my own firm? And I felt like maybe I needed to go somewhere in a smaller firm first. Obviously I made the move to Morgan Hunt, and again that was great. A different size of organisation, learned a lot there, but it came to a point where I felt I was ready. So and hopefully we have a good wee business. It's still relatively fresh. It's only 6-7 months in now, so still learning a lot. Still got a lot of mistakes to probably make, but so far so good. And I think people always say that, do you wish you'd done it sooner? You get the whole cliche, I wish I'd done it sooner, but I don't feel like that. I actually feel like I've probably timed it relatively well. You get to a certain age of life where you feel like you're mature enough, or you've made your mistakes and you're ready to go. So I feel like I'm hopefully, fingers crossed, touch wood, that I've...
Yeah, it's interesting. I started Block Architects when I was 30, you know, and actually only probably about 3 years or so at university. I think that I started too soon at times.
Really? Yeah.
So there's never the right time, I suppose.
So you worked in industry for how long before you started
it? I think I was only 2 or 3 years, since qualification before I started it. Yeah.
I was young, yeah.
I was quite young,
Yeah.
But I had no aspirations at that time of having something, bigger. I just thought I'm going to work myself from the front room and I'll be quite happy. But it never worked out like that. So
yeah, exactly.
It. No, I'm interested. So recruitment across the construction industry, across the professions, if you like, within the industry, is something that's quite interesting. We're a kind of, yo-yo hiring, recruiting. Things are changing. The industry's quite dynamic just now. How are you finding things just now in industry in terms of recruitment? What's your thoughts?
It's an interesting one. So I think the recruitment industry, if you look at it from a macro picture, has had a tricky couple of years. If you go and look at the big boys I mentioned, like your Hayes and your Randstads and your Michael Page, if you go and look at the data on those guys, they hold the lion's share of the market, the majority of the revenue. The recruitment industry in the UK is responsible for £40 billion worth of revenue a year. It's a big industry. But those guys, I think Hayes have about $7.5 billion of that alone. But they've all been dropping market share, dropping revenues, dropping profits, because the landscape's changing massively for us, because there's a lot more companies like myself, 4 or 5 people. I think there's a stat out there that there's 30,000 recruitment companies now operating in the UK. So you can see that the landscape's changing. But you get a bit negged out if you look at it in the sense that the 3 biggest players in the market are dropping revenue and dropping profits. You think, well, this isn't great. But on the flip side, the market still grew by 5% last year. So for me, looking at it, I still think there's massive opportunity in our industry. But it is a changing landscape. As you all know, within architecture, there's new softwares, AI coming in. How does that impact your job? Yada, yada, yada. But the lion's share, we are massively seeing demand increase. You know, we'll talk about it, there's skill shortages, there's this and that. So job flow for us is just ramping up and ramping up. I guess one of the challenges is how do you find
the candidates
and how do you actually fill all those jobs? Because I think our job flow might be increasing in one hand, but is there interviews? Maybe not. You know, I think I looked at it the other week when I personally had 18 live jobs on the park in one given sort of 14-day period, but I think only 6 of those jobs got to interview. Right. So when you look at that, you're thinking, it's not a great stat. You know, there's quite a lot of clients there at the end of those 14 days are probably quite annoyed at me that I've not got them a candidate or not got somebody to interview. But that's not just an issue on my front, that's a whole market issue that we'll touch on in due course. But there is definitely a...
Architecture is your speciality within Confero. The other sectors you're recruiting for?
So yes, I do architecture. Grant does civil structural engineering. We've got Roddy, who does our facilities management. Alistair, who then looks after our social housing. And then Nicole, who does more what we would call commercial, so QSs, estimators, that kind of thing. Okay, so we've got some plans afoot as to what other sectors we would like to sort of move into. Like, we don't have anybody doing what we would call core construction, so site managers, project managers. We don't have anybody doing M&E design at the moment, so there are things that we'll look at in due course, but baby steps first, Kenneth. Baby steps.
But it's refreshing to know that for such a young company you're starting to plug those key roles and looking to actively, you know, recruit candidates and find clients in those areas of the sector, you know.
Totally. I think that's got to be our niche, you know, like we are a built environment recruiter. We want to stick within that within that sort of brand and identity. So most of our clients will be Scottish companies, SMEs. That's the sort of target market that we've got. And we definitely see a gap there, a need, a demand there.
Yeah. So let's think, because the podcast has really exposed quite a lot. I mean, the whole industry, the construction industry in the UK and Scotland, it's exposed that there is, you know, or the feeling is there's skill shortages. The feeling is there's no candidates. The feeling is that, and you know, there's going to be a huge shortfall in the next 5-10 years of people in the construction industry. And that's why I thought I'd get you along to try and tease from you maybe some of the numbers, the stats that I know you've been working on, to try and find out a bit, or gain a bit of a more kind of rounded perspective on what's actually happening in the industry. I mentioned earlier that we were in the hunt there for an architect, and we're finding in the industry there's kind of, you know, fits and bursts of projects. It might be something to do with the upcoming election. Just, you know, people are a wee bit hesitant about kicking the project off. Maybe things will change over the next 3 or 4 weeks, hopefully. But I don't know if you want to talk just about architecture or just talk about, you know, general recruitment in the business. But what's your feelings then? I'll just start off maybe with the skills gap. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll answer it from a skills gap perspective first, and then I'll hone in on architecture, because it's obviously what we all probably understand a bit better. But yes, there's a huge skill shortage in the industry. There's no doubt about that. I think it looks like it's a lot more acute in Scotland than what it is in England. And as I was explaining before, that there's a whole big macro picture as to why that is. It goes back to like population data. If you look at from the 80s to current times, the population of England's increased by something like 25%, whereas Scotland, they reckon it's only 8 or 9. So you can see that Scotland has got an issue with growth rates. Again, why is that? England have had higher birth rates than Scotland have had, so obviously the population's grown, and they've had bigger migration that we've had in Scotland. So that's one issue.
Better water than that.
That's what, sorry?
Better water.
Maybe it is. So the byproduct of that means then that Scotland's got an ageing workforce. So it's got smaller growth rates and an ageing workforce. And like, as I was looking at some of this stuff earlier on, like I've just moved into a new build house. So like my back garden, it's my garden, and then it's just a whole site of stuff getting worked on. So I looked at the guys in the crane, the guys in the forklift, the guys lifting the hooking on the timber trusses, hooking them up, and I think there was maybe 10 men in my eye line. 2, I reckon, were in their 20s. The rest of them were easily 50 north of, and that goes back to the problem that we've got an ageing workforce. We've got guys there that are going to retire, and when they retire, we don't just lose their skills, but we lose their experience. And then there's a whole other set of data if you look into with regards to like apprenticeships. I don't know why this is. I'm not close enough to it, but they reckon that the apprenticeship fallout rate is something like 45 or 46%.
right?
Which is unbelievable. But again, why is that? Is it because the job on site is too difficult? Is it too much manual labour? Are brickies, joiners, sparkies, these guys out on site, is it not sexy anymore to do that job in the era that we live in, where people are influencer led? Is there easier jobs that you could do? Is there, you've got all these guys online proclaiming you can make 10 grand just sitting in your bedroom and Forex trading and all this kind of stuff. So
yeah, some of them can. I think that's the thing that my older head would probably say is that, there's certainly people out there who can sit and make 10 grand a week sitting in their bedroom, and then they're throwing courses out there for everyone else to come and do the same thing. But 90% of those people are never going to have the kind of income stream they're doing. So, but I guess that's the thing of social media and the younger generation. In fact, we recorded a podcast earlier, and it's the same kind of theme as that the kind of the younger generations are maybe looking at what's sexy, what's warm, what can I do with a laptop and then go to the beach, and that might sound a bit cliche, but I do think that there's an element of that.
100%.
I definitely do think there's an element of that, and. Is construction hard? It's not easy. I certainly think site work can be cold and wet and miserable over the winter. But is it a hard job? I don't know. It's a physical job. But I don't understand. I truly don't understand with the whole AI premise that's coming up, why the younger generation, the school leavers, don't think to themselves, well, actually, if I go and get a trade, my job, I think, is going to be pretty secure for the next 20, 30 years, because I cannot see how, unless we're bringing robots onto sites, which I think could come with difficulties. I mean, you could see some kind of automation on sites, but
I would agree,
it's going to have, if you want to make money, I think you just need to take
probably more with off-site manufacturing than anything at the minute, but it doesn't fix the issue with maintenance. I think the M&E market has got a huge issue with the amount of people coming into that market, so there's definitely a lot of opportunity there. So no, you're right. I think anybody that wanted to look at a recession-proof or future-proof type job, then a physical skilled trade would be a very sensible way to approach it with the changing market. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So what are we thinking then about architecture? What are you finding in terms of architecture is the obviously that's close to my heart, because I am an architect by profession, and it's that thing of a few questions, what's the quality of the architects like that's coming across your desk just now? How would you maybe compare them to ones you've had in the past, or where you think it's going in the future? And how does the kind of, you mentioned earlier that you managed to get 6 interviews, but is it harder or easier to find them?
It's definitely got harder, 100%. Right. I think if I look back to when I first started recruitment, I feel like I could give a client a 4 or 5 person shortlist, and I feel like the client would have a head scratch as to like, who do I employ? There's a couple of good options here, and more often than not now, you might be getting them 1 or 2 if you're lucky. So I think definitely there's been a change in that. I mean, there's 101 reasons why. I think fundamentally now there is a lot more choice. So when you go back to university, if you were going to study in the 80s, 90s, whatever, versus now, how many more course choices have you got? So are you going to choose architecture? Are you going to choose M&E? Are you going to choose civil structural or QS when you've got all these other choices? So I think that's one thing to be said. And then the second thing is there's now much more awareness in the wider society that actually, what are these industries paying? Is it good, bad, or indifferent compared to what else could be available in the market? So there's definitely an issue with what interest we're getting at university for courses. I know that the data on landscape architects and then QSs has really dropped. So that's a big issue. Architecture still actually been doing okay, and it's in the main for the amount of people that are entering it. But then again, don't forget Scotland's got a very different system to England, because it doesn't cost as much, if anything, to go to university here versus in England. Like, what is it, 10 grand a year to study to be an architect in England? So 5-year course, you're 50 grand down. By the time you take a maintenance loan, you're probably not too far off 100 grand. To go to uni to be an architect. Money, So huge money. And is that worth it when you come out the other end and you're getting a newly qualified architect, maybe let's say get 30 grand to start? So when you look at that data, it's not exactly great. You put that into London, which is a lot worse than here for cost of living and stuff, and even though you might be getting paid 10-15% more, it doesn't quite add up mathematically.
Yeah, so I mean, I trained in London when I did my part 1, part 2. That long ago now, I can't even remember the terms. But I do remember, and I remember some of my university colleagues deciding they're going to stay in London, and then you think they're sharing their salaries, and you go, how are you living on that in
How are you
London?
affording it, yeah.
You know, and then they can't afford a house, so they're in an HMO or living with other professionals, etc. It's definitely a lifestyle choice.
It is, but then again, if I look back over the past 4 or 5 years, particularly from COVID, there's been quite a lot of people, like families, when they've had that first child, start to look to come back up. So a lot of that, yeah, we get quite a lot of it. Because obviously if they've got a mother and father, let's say, still in Scotland, and they're maybe thinking, well, there's more childcare support or more of an infrastructure or family, so maybe come back up for that. And when you look at the cost of living here versus the salary, it's far better. It's far better work-life balance than what you get in London.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why I never stayed in London as well, because I just felt as every time you walked out the front door, you were spending 10 quid, and it was just fumes.
And the rest.
You bought a bottle of water and a ticket for Underground, you were a tenner. You know?
Exactly.
It's crazy.
I know.
It's crazy.
Before you get your coffee and your croissant.
I couldn't afford them. I was a student. At the time. No, that's it. So we've got the kind of skills gap. So we've obviously been trying to find an architect, and we've put it out there. Here's the frustrating thing for us is, and not so much for recruitment, because forgive me, we'll always try and find our own, team as well. But you'd put out a specific job role, and then we get, interior designers applying for an architect's role. We'll get part 1 and part 2 students applying for, a senior architect's role. We ask for UK based experience, to which the majority of the applicants are foreign applicants with little to no UK experience whatsoever. So in terms of the skill shortage, we would certainly think there seems to be this, I don't know, almost like people are trying to grab an opportunity just to get started in the UK.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's frustrating. I mean, for example, we've scaled back our spend on job adverts because the return on investment just doesn't make any sense. And that's weird for a recruitment company to say we're not advertising as much, because it's time consuming more than anything else. But you're right. But that's another skill shortage issue, is to, post Brexit, we have had less people migrating to the UK. And the migrant workforce was a huge part of the construction labour force. So that's another reason why we've got a skill shortage there. But and as a result of post Brexit legislation on visas, it's now harder to get a lot of these people the working rights to work in the United Kingdom. But another issue is that universities in Scotland, because I don't quite know how SAS works, because I'm obviously not Scottish, never went through the system that way, but my understanding is if you went to uni here, SAS, it's about £2,000 a year for a university course. Is that correct?
I can tell you.
I think it is. Yeah. So SAS pays that, not you, whereas in England it's £10,000. But the byproduct of that is that Scottish universities have to seek applicants from international sources so they can charge them more money.
Right. So
you then get an influx of international students coming to Scotland. Fine. So that's how the Scottish universities make money. Maybe how they can afford to justify giving Scottish students for £2,000. I don't know the politics behind it, but it makes sense, doesn't it? But then that means that whenever these guys do 2 or 3 years at uni here, whatever, they come out the other end, they want a job, so they're applying for your jobs. Fine. But you can't employ them unless you can get them a visa. To get them a visa, you have to pay them, well, it was 30.5 grand was the starting salary. I think it's now 42 grand in order for them to qualify for the graduate working visa, which there's no way you're going to pay.
No.
So the whole system doesn't really make any sense from that point of view. Right. I can understand why they're applying, but it just doesn't stack up. I mean, and we can't look at it. If they do not have a right to work in the United Kingdom, then we can't help them. And I have not had a client sponsor a candidate for a visa as of yet in architecture. I know it happens in other industries, but not a lot within construction.
Right. So then that brings me to the thought of the question then, that you've obviously got, you have got some skilled workforce here in Scotland, so the UK, architects who are sitting there maybe in some quite happy sitting working away in their job, whatever it is, Glasgow, Edinburgh, whatever. Is there a kind of, are these candidates happy just to sit where they are, or what's your feeling for the industry just now? No, people are generally happy to sit where they are just now, or you're seeing a kind of an uptake in people looking for a move? So
you're right in your first point. We have a highly skilled workforce, and what we've got is skill short, but it's highly skilled. I think if particularly with architecture, I think the UK's got one of the most reputable sort of architectural courses in Europe. It's highly regarded internationally. So they have a track record of producing good talent. And that probably goes across other industries. I'm not quite sure exactly how M&E and civil structurals reviewed, but I know architecture is highly thought of. So we do have good talent. Why are people not moving? I mean, Kenny asked a great question, and I would love to know the answer to it. I ask it all the time. When I ask people, there is a lot of reasons. I think there's this whole fear of being the sort of last guy in the door and the first one out if things go Pete Tong. And again, if you look at the market in the past couple of years, there has been some issues. You know, as you know, there's been certain parts of the Scottish economy have struggled, like investment within the NHS, like capital projects in the NHS get completely frozen, and that wasn't past planning, just got shelved. I know one particular architectural practice had mentioned that they had nearly lost £400,000 in fees in that one policy decision. So can you imagine running a business and you get 400 grand of fees just taking off your...
I've done it when I've had 200 taken away from me. It's not nice.
Well, so obviously they then made a bunch of redundancies. And we've had the same situation within the housing market, social housing market, had a lack of funding, and there was a lot of redundancies come out of that sector. So I think then that puts this fear in the employees that, the market's not great, it's not a good time to move. When actual fact that it's only certain industries that policy has affected. If you look at other industries, like where are we getting a lot of funding right now, where are we seeing a lot of growth, where we're seeing it from MOD. So obviously, given what's going on in the world, we are seeing a lot of money getting put into it. They reckon over the next 10 years it's going to get better. There's loads of frameworks there, hard to get onto, but nonetheless there's still opportunity. If you look at the data centre market, given the increase of AI, there's lots of data centres. I think even just here in Lanarkshire there's a £1 billion piece of investment from Data Vita.
Yeah, I was at an event there. I think it was closer to 2 with an overall projection of 8 billion, over the course of so many years.
Well, there we go.
Investment.
And again, then you look at other industries like the golf industry in Scotland. Lots of American money coming into it. There's a
kind of gone a course now because
exactly. So there's a new development up in Fife. Alvarez and Marshall are the developer. I think it's a £500 million piece of infrastructure project. £120 million on the actual building itself. Right. If you look at Centre Parks, which will be done down the Scottish borders, again another £500 million piece of civil infrastructure work. So there is a lot still happening and a lot to be sort of positive about. But I think if you don't get that message out to people, you can see why you would get negative. If you look at the headline figures of no money in social housing or no money in the NHS and all these big projects getting shelved, then it could be perceived as quite a bad marketplace, when in reality it's actually doing pretty well. Yeah,
I think the markets, well, my view on it is markets have always been relatively busy, in terms of architecture and construction. I think the challenge might be is just how you scrape a margin out of it. That's the challenge, I think, for architects. And not just architects, the contractors, you hear it all the time, big contractors, multi-billion pound turnovers working for 1-2% profit. You go, one bad month and you're away.
You're trolling, yeah.
So that I think that's the slip of it. But all of that said, one of the things that strikes me is how we kind of make the kind of whole industry a bit more sexier for people, and much more attractive. And one of the things that was brought up in the last podcast was about salaries, was how, because I think a lot of the kind of, younger, and that said, there is actually a lot of people trying to get into the kind of design, architecture, ME, maybe not QS, if you said, but, well, actually, do you want to expand on that? How are you finding the trends in those different professional roles?
You mean in how many people are getting into the industries?
Yeah. I think you mentioned earlier that some of them are struggling and some of them are a bit better than others.
All I know is that I know you had Vivian on, and she was talking about her course, for example. I think she runs 2 courses each year. And my understanding is that you need to have, I think, 16 people on the course in order to get funding for it. So, and I think the universities work the same. They have to hit a certain quota before they can run the course. And I know there was a couple of issues with some of the universities that their QS intake was starting to drop to a number that was almost going to struggle for funding. So as to why that is, I don't know, Kenny. I honestly don't know the reason behind that. But I know that like architecture, interior design, these kind of things are looked at as quite nice creative jobs. People do like to go and study them. The problem is then it's the dropout rates you get at part 1. It's the dropout rates you get at part 2. It's the dropout rates you get when people have families and they're hitting this sort of age and stage where they need their salaries to go up by 5-10 grand, but industry isn't supporting that. The dropout rates we're getting there is high, and it's got higher. I think if I think about the amount of phone calls I would get from people that would ask the question, let's say it's a chartered architect, hypothetically speaking, 10 years post-qual, a prime experienced candidate, quite often they would say, what else is there out with of architecture? How do I get into project management? How do I get into design management? Will other industry with my skill set be in demand? Because they're wanting this 10 or 15 grand increase that maybe industry isn't going to support right now. That's happening all too often. And if we allow that to happen for another 5 or 10 years, and salaries don't go with the demand, then our skill shortages will get even worse.
Yeah. Well, as architects, training does give them a lot of transferable skills, but particularly within the construction, project management, as you say, or specialising in a particular niche. Which I think specialisation is probably a good thing. Doctors tend to specialise, which means you're no longer the generalist. You're actually focusing on something, and your salary in theory could go up. But I think construction is notorious as an industry as something that, I mean, everybody thinks, everybody's creaming profits because you're in construction and development, but actually it's one of the toughest industries to make a profit in, and it's also the first one that government wants to tax. We'll just, for example, I'm going to say it again, it's a small example, but bloody swallow boxes, bird boxes, local governments decided that in order to help with the bird population, that will make developers put swallow boxes on their building.
I've heard you talk about that. So
it gets, and it's one of those things that all that bureaucracy and ridiculousness. And it's, yes, I say it again, a broken record. It's all for the right reasons, but all of a sudden it's construction that's having to try and fix it, fund it. So that's one of the ones. Anyway, I'm in a tangent with that one. So back to architecture. So I was wondering then whether or not you think the architecture profession has had to adapt since COVID, as has many, to look at, what are you offering the candidate? Is it flexible working hours, working from home, health benefits, can I bring cars back? Not allowed to do that. But, do you think that maybe there's an element of that people are getting, added benefits that they're sitting going, do you know what, I'm all right sitting where I am, I'm quite happy just to stay here?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt about it that the work-life balance of an architect has improved from 2020. So that's been a good thing for the industry. I think it probably accelerated its growth and adaptation in the market. So that was good. However, we have seen a lot of architect firms now start to go back and revert to previous ways of working, i.e. firms that were doing maybe 2 days in the office, 3 at home, have started now thinking, this maybe isn't quite working as well for, I'll touch on it in a second, productivity reasons or staff development reasons. So maybe they're now going back to like 4 days in the office, 1 at home. So we have seen a big step change there. There isn't as many firms now offering complete flexibility as what there was. I think what you're starting to see now is more flexibility around the starting time and the finish time. So it's common now that, let's say, a traditional 8:30 or 9 o'clock start and 5 or 5:30 finish, whatever, that's what's flexing more. If you want to come in an hour early and finish an hour early because that suits the family, so be it. But there is more preference for people being in the office now than what there was. And I don't want to mention too many clients' names and throw them under the bus, but there was a particular client, a pretty big firm, that had mentioned that their issue was starting to develop from their senior and their management staff, so i.e. their senior architects and their associates, that they were maybe taking too much liberties, working at home too often. And the byproduct of that was then that the juniors, so the part twos, the junior architects, weren't getting enough one-to-one time with the experienced staff. So therefore, in one of their operational reviews, they sort of looked at it and thought, these guys, these part twos, these architects aren't of the quality that they should be, and it's our fault. It's not theirs. They're in the office, they're wanting to learn, but there's nobody there to teach them. So they actually then went back on their working policy for that reason. So there has been issues with it as much as there's been positive implications. But as per your question regarding does that make people stick in a job, I think it's always easier to stick than twist in life, isn't it? It's always easier to just keep something similar rather than change. So that's one thing. But I think, as you know, with an architect, you can get quite emotionally attached to the project or whatever it is. So quite often what you would see is that people will tactically make moves at different stages in their career. So there's always these different move points. So one of the first move points is when you get chartered, you should always temperature check, right? Where am I? Is this good? How's my money compared to my peers? How's my projects? Am I going to be in the same thing for the next 5 years? Should I change now to try something different? That's always the first real proper tactical move point. The next one is when you're in that range of like project architect, you're running jobs, maybe you've delivered a job. Once that's finished, is that a good time to move? So you'll get people starting to check that. So it's quite a complicated industry for that. It's what you're starting to see in different industries like project management or site management. The tenure that they'll do in jobs versus architecture is so much lower because they will only really just do the project and then they'll move because it's more project dependent than it is employer dependent.
Yeah.
So you're seeing a whole cultural shift there. But another thing you're seeing is due to the younger generation, culturally, it's not as cool to stay in the same job for 20 or 30 years as what it once was. I think back, my mum and dad worked in the public sector, but I look at them and they probably think that I'm mad being in the private sector and moving jobs and all. They were always like, "Oh, it's a bit risky." But their mentality was, you get a job, you stick with that job, you make it work, and you work up the ladder, and you'll be looked after. But now that's not deemed the same. I think the average tenure is about 3.5 years in a job.
Yeah.
So culturally, we're in a different environment that we have to accept that people will now make those moves, and it's very difficult from a client perspective as to how you combat that. Is it a cultural thing that you can get right that's going to make people stay on average 8 to 9 years? If they're going to move in 3.5 years, they're going to move in 3.5 years.
Yeah, I think as a business owner, you're always conscious of the fact that people could move, but also you've got to give them that free rein to get to know your clients and work with your clients and
Totally.
Because you can't do it all. At the end of the day, if you try to grow up at a business, any business, you cannot do it all. So you've got to rely on your team and your staff to nurture those relationships.
Totally.
And keep going.
But another thing from an architect perspective is, and you'll know this having worked in practice, that especially in Scotland, it's quite siloed. So you get a certain brand of architect firm that might specialise in healthcare. So you get another brand of architect that might specialise in housing, or another one that specialises in hotels. So if you stay within that firm, then all you're going to work on is that type of project.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will be smart about it and think, well, I've done 3.5 years there, all I've done is hotels. If I do another 5 years there, then I'm 8 years deep and all I've ever done is hotels. If I then go and speak to Kenny about his job and he's maybe doing a 40, 50 unit housing development, is Kenny interested in me?
So, I get that because we've been through that. I mean, Block Architects deals with various types of projects and different skills of project. And to me, that's what makes my job interesting. I can't actually think of anything worse than having to deal with the same type of project for 7, 8, 9 years. But I guess the thing is, that's specialising, and there's an advantage to that. There's a business advantage to that. But personally, no, I like it when every day is different and the projects are different. But what we do is take the learnings from each different project, good or bad, and say, right, how do we take that and put it in the next project so that the next project is a success, or certainly doesn't have any trappings of failures of the last one. And I think, my opinion is for the team, it gives them a bit of variety, because I think people like variety as well.
Totally, yeah, totally. Especially when you can get, as you know, in your job, big projects like, let's say it's a hospital. You can be on it for 5, 6 years at times. They're so big. So I think when you're done with that, going on to another hospital and facing the fact that, I'm going to have to do it for another 5 or 6 years, that's when, again, somebody's emotions will kick in and think, maybe it's time to go and look at the market and try something different. And that's why you'll get people moving tactically to change sector if they can't get it from their current employer.
I think that's just a thought that came in my head. Is that process for an architect, for any, I'm going to say an architect, I can only give the architect's opinion, is actually quite exhausting. I remember my first project straight at university. It was 2 years I'd worked on it. I was working on other stuff, but this project was my baby. And I remember handing over the keys to the client, and the next day I wasn't going to site, and I just thought, I think I'm depressed. I genuinely thought I was depressed. I thought, what am I going to do? And you walk into the office and you're not working on that project. You walk in on Monday and go, what am I working on now?
Totally.
It's like you've given your baby away. Someone's took it, and the client, I'm putting myself into the client's perspective here, and I could be talking nonsense, but they don't see that it was your baby. It was always their baby because they're the one who's paying for it. They know you're invested to deliver it, but they don't get the emotional investment.
Nope.
And that was something that was an eye opener for me. It's like, wow, and I'm always at that situation where you're the business owner and you've got a team of people working in projects, and you think, I need to not get as involved in each project, because could you imagine being so involved in 6 or 7 projects, then having said there's the key? I don't think my emotions could cope with it.
Totally, but there's people that is. That's sometimes the motivators of some people, and again, it's probably why you get into the industry you get into, because you have that personality, that character, that you care and that you want to do well for your client. And again, that's what makes architects so special in the process, that maybe they look at it a bit differently than some other people. Some other people will just look at it as it's just a job, it's just a project, don't care that much. I'll just do it.
Well, the premise of the Hard Tack Talks podcast is we like to try and dive a wee bit deeper into what the big issues are in the industry. So if you could pick just one issue in recruitment, whether it's the architecture side or any other areas your colleagues are working on, what's the biggest challenge you're facing just now in recruitment?
Well, the industry, I think, faces 2 main challenges at the minute. One is the connection between education and industry. So there isn't really enough of a connection there. And if you look at it from something that you'll understand, or the podcast will understand, because you've had Vivian on from New College Lanarkshire, and she's an exception to the rule because she is so passionate and so caring about her students that she goes an extra mile above most other people in her peer group would do. So much so that she arranges like mock interviews, work experience, stuff that she doesn't get paid to do. That's not her job. And her job is to teach, to deliver a curriculum as per the SQA. That is all she's paid to do. All that extra stuff she does from the goodwill of her heart. And if every other college or university done that, there'd be a lot more of a connection between the education and industry. But again, not everybody does do that. So, and the byproduct of that is that if you look at her course and the stats of her course, it's performed exceptionally well versus some others. I think if I can recall what she said in the podcast, post-COVID, there was only 2 or 3 years where she had almost 100% employment rates. And then obviously things change, markets change, maybe the demand wasn't quite there. But again, on that topic, once you finish your HND now and you are an architectural technologist, one of the issues that architecture faces is that those guys don't just go and become an architectural technologist. They could go and become a facade draftsman. They could go and become a BIM coordinator for a contractor. They could go and join MEP as a Revit technician because they don't have any other course to train them for that. They can go to a surveying firm. They can go to like training companies like CAD Assist or whatever. So there's so many different routes that they can go down. So what percentage of those students are actually just going into traditional architectural technology, and how many are going into other industries? So that's one thing, and I think that there needs to be something in place to connect more of the education to industry. I know in England there's a lot of chatter about this at the minute, and there's a lot of people getting frustrated about the education system and is it fit for purpose? Has it modernised itself, or is it still doing the same things it was doing 30, 40, 50 years ago? I mean, I don't know the answer to that because I've never been through the system. Obviously you'll know better than me, but there's a lot of frustrations about people that come out just don't understand the commerciality of business. They don't understand the reality of what it's like to run an architecture practice. These guys are coming out demanding, X, Y, and Z salaries. It just doesn't compute. These guys aren't profitable on day one. They're actually costing.
Take them years before they're profitable.
Well, exactly. So there's a big sort of debate in that. So that's definitely one of the big.
So how is that a big issue for you then in recruitment?
Because that creates an issue with the development of people further down the line. It's stemming into the skill shortage. If you look at, I think I mentioned earlier, the 18 live jobs I had in that one given week, I reckon probably 14 or 15 of them were all the same. Every client needs let's say a 30 to 45 grand candidate, because they're the ones that you can get a bit of productivity out of. They're the ones you can make a bit of profit out of. Anything south of that, they're not profitable because they normally cost you more.
You're
time.
training them.
Exactly. And anything north of that, they're probably too costly to get profitability out of versus whatever margin you're making in your project. So everybody's wanting that same thing. So if we don't get the development of people right at the start, then it's creating an issue. And if you look at, again, post-COVID, the amount of people that have left the profession, I think the architect ARB put a stat out a while ago that they had lost 5,000 architects in 1 year on the ARB register. Right. Whereas if you look at the CAT, they had actually been increasing membership slowly. So there's definitely issues there. That's why it's fundamentally an issue for us in our job, because if I've done this for 12 years, if I'm doing it for the next 12 years, the pipeline for the profession is as important to me as it is for you.
Sure, yeah.
You know, if it doesn't keep coming in the way we need it to, then we've got problems. And I think if you look at, again, I was talking to a client last week about this, and she was looking at her P&L and sort of saying, right, I've got a bit of a gap in, let's say, 3 to 5 year post-qual. So it's a cost gap. It's 35 to 40 grand. If I can get 2 or 3 appointments in there, it sits within our balance sheet, our P&L, keeps things profitable. But if she recruits north of that 40 grand figure, squeeze everything. She can't have too many people in that price range. So you've got to manage your business.
Yeah. I think it's the balance between what you're paying people and their experience and what they're bringing to the business. I mean, certainly, I know you've just taken on a young guy there who's came to Satish Part 2 with a master's. And we're back to that situation whereby I think as a company we've got a responsibility to bring on, you know, young architects and train them. You know, there's certainly some things that, I mean, when it comes to software, I think, oh man, I just don't know half the stuff this guy knows, you know. And I'm cool with that, you know, I don't want to learn all that stuff again. But there is that thing of, when it comes to the kind of planning, building control conversations, one of the reasons why we are in the office full time, yes, with flexible start and finish times, is because we need the younger members of staff listening to the more senior members of staff with tenure experience, so they know how to speak to planning, how to speak to building control, how to resolve those issues, you know, verbally as well as on the drawing board. So there's definitely a practical skills gap as well as the kind of academic skills gap. But I do think that the architecture courses just now, they need to change. It's probably not right that an architect, and it's been, I mean, I was the same, you know, you're just not valuable to the business really until you've got three years experience, you know, post qualification. And then that brings me to the kind of expectation. I think I'm reflecting a conversation I've had with a developer client of mine, is that, you know, just because, you know, you're an architect, you know how to build things on site. And the reality is you don't know how to build things on site. You know how to be, you could have 10 years experience sitting in an office on a drawing board, and you know how to draw things, detail things, but the reality of putting that together and thinking about how that sequences on site is something that you'll never have unless you've got site experience. And the reality just now is that a lot of clients don't want to pay to take the architects on site.
Oh, really? So,
I think there was some stats came out there. It was a LinkedIn questionnaire to architects, how you know, percentage wise, how much time do you spend on site, you know? And some were saying 20-25%. A lot of them had nothing. And you think, well, that's a huge skills gap there for me, is that, you know, clients need to understand that if you're looking for an architect to take your project on site, probably most of you should be, then you need to make sure that you're prepared to pay for that, because it's the only way architects are going to get that fill that skills gap.
But that's a good point you make there, because that talks about the evolution of the role of an architect and what's in demand, and you know, the Building Safety Act will change that further. But then the question is, has university adapted to that? Has the course adapted to what's actually in demand? No, because again, if I look at comparing the ARB or whatever with CAT. I mean, I might be slightly more biased because I've got more of a relationship with CAT. I don't really have too much. But I've tried with ARB. The ARB do presentations to the university courses about industry. CAT do.
I don't know.
Because I know that I've been there in the front line with them when they present to Napier, and they explain to them, like, here's the reality of what it's like in practice. Here's what your journey looks like. How do you become a chartered technologist? What's your salary is going to be like? What do you have to cover off in order to become chartered? What are we looking at metric wise? So they create a clear path, and they talk about, and then we talk about, well, what do you have to do for CV, and what do you have to do for a portfolio? What do you have to do for interviews? So there's loads of stuff there, but it doesn't seem like the architecture courses are doing as much of that.
Yeah,
connect it.
I think there's there's rumours of a whole kind of, and I say the rumours, I've been reading up, and I think there's changes proposed. Whether they happen or not, I don't know. But certainly it's a, well, I wanted to become an architect when I was younger because I could draw, and I liked drawing pigeon huts, which was my dad's thing, and that's why I ended up thinking I'm going to go and become an architect because I love to draw all day.
Yeah.
Really having little to no understanding of what it was about. And okay, I got a couple of jobs working in an architect's office for a week or so, and I kind of fell in love with the profession before I was ever an architect, and that was me, off I went. But I went to the Macintosh School of Architecture, and I got in. I was told it was the best, so I went for it, and I got in, and I thought, great. And then I remember the first year, you're sitting looking at doing things like, there's a whole selection of wood on the table there. So pick a poem and make a little maquette, a wee model out of the wood that you can talk to about the poem. And I'm for shots, and I'm looking at this going, these guys have lost it. What are they talking about, So it took me a good year. I would say it was the end of second year before I actually grasped why I was there.
Yeah.
Because I just thought I was going to go away and learn how to draw buildings and then put them on site. That's what I thought. But you get the whole thing, scale, mass, looking at proportion, being able to actually look at a building and draw it and understand why it's built the way it is, and how do you fit a building in a corner, and how do you fit a building in a gap site, and all these things. And you go, right, okay, so all great learning, but absolutely probably not. Do we need to take it 5 years? Do we need to do it in 5 years to go then out in the workforce or the workplace and go, oh, what's everything I've learnt there? Just keep it in the back of your head, but now you're going to learn how to be an architect.
Aye, do it over again.
Yeah, it's an odd thing, So I think there's maybe that thing. I think, I dare say for me, if you want to become a design architect, which I never ever thought about, it turned out in the end up, I won a couple of prizes. I was not too, but I was never the best, but, I was all right, and I worked for some big design practices in London, which was a great experience. But I think the point is that, there are some people out there, I think, who would quite happily become site architects, who are not necessarily there to design the building, but they're there to look at the details that the building want, the construction information is there, and make sure that that's delivered according to the design intent, No,
definitely. I would see that. I would see that you get architects that would call themselves design architects, and they work stages 0 to 3, and then you get other guys that call themselves more like, I'm a technical architect, I work more stages, 4, 5, whatever. So you do get a lot of that. Yeah. People tend to maybe be pigeonholed or specialised depending on whatever practice they work for or whatever they're into. Because some people are more interested in the technical side of things. Some people just find that more interesting.
You mentioned there was 2 challenges. You've mentioned the first one. What was the second one?
Well, probably the fact that the issue then is that it's creating this development gap at a certain age and stage.
Right.
That's the problem we've got. I think it's I don't want to make it age profiling, but we have got this mid-market problem that because the education system maybe isn't teeing up enough people coming in the industry, or they're going off in too many different paths, that it's creating then a lack of proper supply into the market. And you're not seeing it as bad yet in Scotland as to what we have been in other parts of the market, but you're definitely going to see it coming, because if we look at the past 3 to 5 years post-COVID, there's so many architects have left to go and be project managers or to go and be design managers. That part of the market's growing. More and more big contractors are taking more and more people in-house, and that's affecting things massively. So I guess definitely.
I've heard generally there's a kind of a flux of QSs is the one in particular I'm thinking about. I've heard some crazy starting salaries for QSs at university. 60 grand I heard. Yeah.
Estimators, QSs, huge demand. Yeah. Huge.
Which is great if you're listening and you're a young college student or university, or pupil at school thinking, what do I want to do? Go and learn to be a QS for 3 years or whatever it is. And then
Well, the whole construction industry, it's growing. If you look at the projects in the park, the value of them, it's been increasing over the past couple of years, which is good. So the industry isn't in a bad place. It's a positive place to work in. It's so important to the UK economy. Like if it doesn't operate well, then the UK economy is going to really be struggling, because it's a huge part of its GDP. And I guess, like we said earlier, if you look at how do you recession-proof yourself, or how do you create a job that's maybe for life, then a trade or a skilled trade is massively important. And I think back to me, like I went to university and studied business studies. What does that mean? What does that make me qualified to do? Whereas if you go and study architecture, you know you can be an architect. If you go and study to be a QS, you know you can be a QS. So it's great to give you that direction that a lot of other courses don't give you. They're far too generic.
It is great direction, but then I do feel sorry for some of the younger ones who are making those decisions and then doing 3 years, 4 years and going, actually, this isn't for me.
I know. But at least if you do that in Scotland, you're doing it at less of a cost than what it is if you do it in England, because you're 40 or 50 grand deep by that point.
That's true, definitely.
And that's, again, as you know, there's a lot of people on LinkedIn that we spoke about before down there that are really trying to shout from the rooftops about that and say, look, you can't make a mistake here. You've got to get this right. You only do this if you want to do it. Yeah. Because actually it is a tough profession and money isn't maybe up there with some of the other parts of construction. And again, that's going to affect things. If people become so aware of, like, here's what architecture pays versus M&E and civil structural, which is a lot higher for a similar job, then why would you do architecture? Yeah. If you've got that intelligence and that ability, if you went to be an M&E engineer or a civil structural engineer, you could be getting paid 10 or 15% more.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing about I'm going to come to the defence of architecture there is just that the architecture role, I think, is just something that is a bit more all-encompassing. 100%. For me, that's what's more interesting.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't think personally of anything worse than just sitting doing only the structure or only the M&E. You know, I think I keep saying it. You know, when the shit hits the fan and something goes wrong, the architect's always the first person to get the phone call. Whether it's something to do with architecture or not. You know, whether it's the QS's price is wrong, or there's something happened on the site, or there's health and safety issue or whatever. It's never the health and safety specialist that gets called first. It's the architect that gets the call first. You know,
but I think that's why it's so frustrating for architects then that they do get annoyed with their salaries. They do get frustrated as to like, well, why don't we get paid more? We do maybe a harder role, so why don't we get remunerated in the same capacity? The architect has to do so much more in the project, maybe in these other guys, and why they're not getting as much.
I think it's probably because architects spend too much of their fees redrawing things. I think we've got to look at ourselves at that. Every time you think, there's another drawing, or I could spend an hour on that and just make that a wee bit better. Yeah. And that is kind of trained into you a bit at university. At university, when you're going through it as an architect, you if you turn round to your tutor and say, I couldn't do that detail or spend an hour on that last night because I had to go and wash my hair. It's like, what? No. You should be spending every day, all day doing art. This is that's probably changed now enough, but that's what it was like when I was going through university.
Totally. But the salary thing's so interesting. We're getting asked, this question by clients all the time. What's the demand? What people are asking? And people are wanting more money, and I can totally understand it. But I can understand it from a client's perspective as to like, how do you justify the 10% increase that people are asking for whenever the fees at your end aren't increasing, but all of your other operational costs are. Your PI goes up, your staffing costs go up, your energy costs go up, your office lease goes up, your computing costs, your Revit licenses, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. Every cost increases, but then...
all of that stuff's going up for the architecture practice, and the reality is who pays for that? Ultimately, it's the client, which ultimately means it's the development that's paying for it, So, you've got to look at the stresses and strains on... and the viability on individual projects. The success of those projects or the failure of those projects is this thing that really sets our fees. Because I mean, the bureaucracy, the legislation, the kind of stealth taxes that clients or developers are having to pay now are all things that's eating away at a margin that's getting tighter and tighter. Lending, it scares you actually. Just
looking at it,
you kind of look at it and go, why would you do a development? But then developers will be developers. As architects will be architects, and there'll all be entrepreneurial spirits out there who've never built anything, who decide they're going to start and do something. And that's just what keeps the industry going.
Totally.
Yeah. I know before we started the podcast, you had a whole kind of host of stats and some interesting facts and figures. Is there anything in particular that we've not chatted about that you want to mention?
No, I think we've probably covered most of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's good.
But I guess there's you were asking about the second thing that's affecting the industry, and we talked about the gaps in it. So there's probably more on that, in a sense of. So let's say there's demand from the economy, which is probably housing right now. That's probably we're going to see a lot of growth coming from housing.
You think so though? Really?
Well, 50% of the construction industry is held up by housing demand.
Yeah, but we know that the housing production's fallen.
Statistically, is it?
Statistically, it's fallen. Yeah, there's less starts and less completions over the last 18 months than has historically ever been.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, it'd be an interesting point to figure out. Like, say it does hit the figures it's meant to hit, and they hit these targets. That would therefore mean that the byproduct would be that you guys need more people with that particular skill set. And what you tend to find whenever we're recruiting is that a client wants to bring somebody in with a particular skill set. So if they're doing a hospital project, they want people with that experience. So that's an interesting point, because if housing starts have dropped in the past, say 2 to 3 years, but if they're going to increase over the next 5, if people then come saying, right, I need people with that experience, if they've been off doing other projects, those architects have now been doing MOD projects or data centres or renewables, and they're getting paid more money in those industries because their margins are higher. Are they then going to want to come back in and do social affordable housing projects that are maybe paying lower margin, therefore lower salaries? That's an interesting point that we are starting to get a bit worried about.
Yeah, I think, well, at the end of the day, once you've had that pay increase, you know, unless you're not really unless your outgoings can support it and supporting taking a lesser of a salary, you know. There's not many, there is some, there's not many, but that would be the issue, you know. And I think, I don't know, I think, I don't know about housing, it'd be an interesting one, because, and then these things, these ebbs and flows create gaps as well for other people to come in and start to fill, and before you know it, you're doing different training. And does the industry change that much over 3 or 4 years? You know, regulations does change, of course it does. The building control regulations in Scotland change every 3 years, but I would dare say if you were away from one sector for 2 or 3 years working in another one, you probably wouldn't have noticed, you know, you'd probably fit back in pretty quickly to working in the...
Well, it'll be interesting to see, because I'm shortlisting for a job with a client now, and they're looking at a lot of social affordable housing projects, and I've got a candidate that's wanting to come back from London, interesting, we talked about that earlier. And they've done bucket loads of this, but it's down in London. So obviously planning legislation is all different. Be interesting to see whether that's an issue or not for that client. You know, that person has done those projects, but in a different regulated environment, a different council. Yeah.
Well, I don't think it would put me off too much, as long as it's kind of transferable. When I mentioned earlier about we were getting candidates applying from, you know, abroad, you know, what some of them with great experience on CV, on paper, you know, the building, you know, multi-stories and Dubai and all that kind of stuff, and you know, but you go, but there's just no knowledge at all of the Scottish regulations and planning system, which is what put me off, you know.
It's very different too, what they build there versus what they build here. We chatted the other day about me being down in Manchester, and like I have been before, so it's not as if I didn't know that, but looking around me and seeing the density of some of the buildings, a lot of like high-rise resi, BTR schemes, student accommodation, whatever, apartments, and obviously because that brings a different type of clientele, it brings a younger population, that therefore Manchester has got a much younger population, and you can see it in the streets. You can see it in the workforce, you can see it in the bars, you can see it in the restaurants. You know, when you look at Glasgow and you don't have that same age range, and it's just completely creates a different social system down there. But I'm assuming that obviously stems back to other policy, that you can't just throw these things up in Glasgow very easily. It's not easy to get planning for these kind of things.
It's not easy to get planned for anything up here.
But any of them you're seeing them now down towards the Clyde, along the Broomielaw, around that, because maybe there's a little bit less. Yeah,
but that was always an area, I think the Clyde, the Broomielaw was always an area that I remember being at university, where the lecturers and the professors were adamant that needed to go, you know, in terms of development. It needed to get started, and you can see it happening now, and it's great.
You can.
Because Glasgow's about one of the very few European cities that didn't have a waterfront that was worth going to at the time, you know, just why would you go there?
Totally.
You know? So it seems to be stuff's happening down there now, and I think the next level is to try and get more like activity stuff that you can actually engage with the river, as opposed to just new buildings happening. You know, what can you do there that you can actually sit by the river in the rain and have a sandwich or a coffee or something? You know?
But it'd be interesting to see if they keep building more of them, because like you say, around the sort of precinct of the Daily Record building, there's another 2 or 3 of those buildings that are almost finished now. So it'll be interesting to see if there's more demand for them. So because Manchester really has got a bucket load of them. I don't know what's comparing to completely different size cities. I get that. It's not like for like, but
cool. Anything else you think we need to cover before we?
No.
Great. So I've got a wee question to you then from our last guest, a wee puzzler.
From the last guest?
From the last guest, right, So thinking about yourself now, you know, and where you're at, what's the one thing you would maybe tell your younger self?
Oh, good question. Probably never get too high and never get too low in business, in the world of work. That's one thing I've probably learnt.
Right. Is that since you've started Confero or
no? Probably just like, as you know, markets ebb and flow, and it can sometimes be your Donald Duck as to whether you're riding a good wave or at the bottom of a bad one. So I mean, like, that's one thing, because you get emotional in your job, don't you? You get really attached to it, and I think that's one thing I'll probably tell myself. Never get too high, never get too low.
I think when you talk about the wave, there is something that I've learned is that when you're on the top of the wave and you've done well, and you think, right, I'm just going to go and sit on the beach now and have a pina colada. Don't get back out and catch the next wave, because as sure as fate, there's a trough coming.
Oh, totally. 100%. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, totally.
Great.
Yep.
Graeme, have you got a question for our next guest?
I didn't even want to ask me that.
Well, it's just the fun.
Who is your next guest?
I can't tell you that.
All right, okay. I'm hoping it'd be a politician, because I know you're trying to get one on.
Oh, we'll give him a question for a politician. And that's it.
We should have voted for it. That'll help me.
You've only a few days left.
No, I think a good one would be if it was somebody relating to architecture, or I suppose it won't be, maybe more around the greater built environment. What could we do to connect our education with our industry? Is there anything that we can put in place that would help connect it better?
Right.
Whether that is something to do with apprenticeships, or whether it's something to do with more likes of what Vivian would do in having mock interviews or work experience or something like that. I think that would help a lot. I know looking back, whenever I went to university, if I had something like that, it would really help me. But unis don't do it. When I was coming out, I did not know what I wanted to do. I did not know what industry I wanted to work in. But there was never really anybody coming in and talking and presenting and showcasing things. So maybe something like that.
Well, I think the podcast is maybe one thing that everybody should listen to then, because that answers a few of those questions and more, hopefully. Fantastic. Graeme, thank you for coming on to the podcast, shared a bit of your insights in business and also the recruitment industry, and particularly architecture is something close to my heart. If there's any listeners or viewers out there who want to reach out to you, how's best to contact you?
Probably LinkedIn. Most people are finding it easier these days. Do people still go on websites in our industry? I don't know.
Yeah, I've got a good one, but I don't know.
That's what I wouldn't know anybody goes on to it. So
yeah, I like LinkedIn anyway. That's great.
Yeah, probably LinkedIn. So
fantastic, Graeme. Thank you for your time, and thanks for coming on the podcast. And we'll see you soon.
Appreciate it. Cheers.
Cool, thank you. Thanks for tuning in to the Hard Hat Talks. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. That way, you'll be sure to never miss an episode. If you've got any feedback or a topic you want us to tackle, please drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Till next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and keep your hard hat on.